At the cross her station keeping, stood the mournful mother weeping, close to Jesus to the light. Through her heart his sorrow sharing, all his bitter anguish bearing, now at length the sword has passed.
Hello, good day to each one of you. I'm here to discuss with you about the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows. And we see in this particular topic the beauty and the historical perspective of this beautiful rosary, okay? The Servite Rosary. Okay, so this is not the Our Lady of Sorrows Rosary only, but we call it in another way the Servite Rosary. And I would like to talk about this beautiful uh, Servite devotion, the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows. And during the Church's history, various rosaries have been developed as an expression of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. The most widely known is the Dominican Rosary, in which we have, look at my rosary, okay? So this is the common rosary that we had. This is the Dominican Rosary, okay? But also popular is the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows. This is the Our Lady of Sorrows, okay? 7 mysteries of sorrows, and we see this one, and also in the slides we see already this rosary, okay? So the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows can be considered the popular devotion proper to the Servite order because of the very real contribution of the Friars, servants of Mary, made into its development, and also because of their commitment to promoting it among the faithful. So the origins of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows are not well known, because we know the popular rosary, the Dominican Rosary, it has now the 20 mysteries, okay? So this is the most popular rosary, and you see the crucifix and then the 5 mysteries. But now there are 20 mysteries, okay? The joyful, the sorrowful, the glorious, and the luminous mysteries. These 7 sorrows, as I told you before, is not that really popular, okay? That's why we want to promote this rosary more, so that they can realize the beauty of the spirituality of this rosary, okay? So they would seem to be coincide with the development of the devotion of the Sorrowful Mother at the beginning of the 17th century, okay? And as we could see, the rudimentary form of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows can be seen in the popular devotion indulged by Pope Paul V with the brief Cum Caritas Oniquique of 14th of February in 1604. So the document granted the number of indulgences to popular devotions to the Confraternity of Saint Mary, established in various Servite churches, specifically in Italy at the time. Among others, the Pope granted 60 days indulgence for the recitation on Saturday of the 7 Our Fathers and 7 Hail Marys in honor of the 7 sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And this is not yet the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows, but some of its elements are already present. The 7 Our Fathers, and the 7 sorrow, the 7, we could say the 7 Hail Marys, an explicit reference of the seven sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. And clearly, though the seven Hail Marys of this popular devotion indulged by Pope Paul V are not yet the seven septeps, the seven Hail Marys that form the essential element of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows and give it its characteristic litany-like rhythm. So the second rudimentary form of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows can be seen in adaptation. In adaptation of the Dominican Rosary proposed by Fra Arcangelo Ballottini of Bologna, one of the servant friars, primarily responsible for the emphasis on the devotion of the Sorrowful Mother in the order of the servants of Mary and the spirituality of the order. In his book, Fonte Salutifera de Gesù, ornata de considerazione, meditazione e soliloquy devoti et affettuosi, published in Venice in 1608, he urged territories to recite the sorrowful mysteries of the Rosary every day and suggested that they give particular attention to the sufferings of Mary during the Passion of her Son. And after the recitation of the Sorrowful Rosary, Ballottini adds that one can affectionately meditate the Blessed Virgin Mother at the foot of the cross with her dead Son, our Savior, Jesus Christ, in her arms. And you are familiar with this image of the Sorrowful Mother carrying Jesus, the dead body of Jesus in the arms of the Blessed Virgin. To facilitate this reflection, Ballottini himself composed meditations of the sacred mysteries of the Passion of Jesus Christ and the Compassion of the Most Sorrowful Mother, divided into 7 points for the 7 days of the week, so that, varying the meditation each day, the soul will experience greater devotion and the body greater consolation. What Ballottini suggested for this devotion was both simple and bold. Simple because to an already established practice, the Dominican Rosary. He added a new servant element, explicit meditations on the sufferings of Mary during the Passion of Christ. Bold because he distanced himself from the Rosary tradition and proposed the daily recitation of the Sorrowful Mysteries, and thus emphasized the contemplation of the Passion of Christ at the expense of the joyful and the glorious mysteries. 2 elements of Ballottini's proposal certainly influenced the structure of the eventual Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows. The daily meditation of the Sorrowful Mysteries, it did become a daily practice for servite tertiaries, and the Rosary-like structure of the devotion, though the decade of the Hail Marys would become a septet, meaning only 7 mysteries. Before it's only 5, but the different mysteries. So every mysteries they have 5, but now we have 1 mystery, the Sorrowful Mystery, in 7. Okay, that's why it's called septet. So the origin of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows, the possibility that future research might identify other rudimentary form of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows cannot be excluded. Such discoveries would indicate even more forcefully that the times were ripe for the creation of this devotion. It can be presumed that devotion resulted from applying the structure of the Dominican Rosary to the custom of daily meditation on the 7 sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. The present state of studies, however, does not permit a precise determination as to who was responsible or when or where this new devotion received the classic structure that has come down to us. In 1617, Fra Arcangelo Balutini published in Bologna the work entitled Practica de recitare la corona della Beata Vergine Maria. Unfortunately, no copy has up to now been found. The origin of this popular devotion was found in 1604 and 1617. So the 1604, the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows, is not mentioned in the itemized list of devotion practiced by the laity in the seven churches, indulged by Paul VI in 14th of February in 1607. In Arcangelo Balutini's in 1608 book Fonte Salutifera de Jesu, this ardent promoter of devotion to the Sorrowful Mother makes no mention of the Rosary, which would certainly have been noted if it existed. Between 1607, however, a reference to this Rosary became common. So after that one, okay. But prior to that, we have the elements, but not the rudimentary form that we know now. We know the seven sorrows, okay. So year earlier, in 1618, Fra Gregorio Alessia of Samariva del Bosco had published in Rome a Corona Septem Dolorem Beate Maria Virgines Figurata. This work too has been lost, so we cannot find the exact origin of this rosary. And Carlo Vicencio Maria Pedeni, in his Historia della Convento di Bologna, documented the early development and success of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows in the famous Bolognese Church in Santa Maria dei Servi. As we cite, it says, in the year 1604, according to Branchisi, in 1604, by order by Most Reverend Father General Angelo Berardi of Perugia, on Passion Sunday, the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows was publicly recited in church by all the people before the holy image of our Sorrowful Mother. This devotion continued every Sunday and feast day after Vespers, led by an assigned religious. This devotion and direction for reciting it were published the same year at Bologna, when Father Master Paolo Antonio Zanni of Bologna was prior. From here, this devotion spread to many churches of our province and order. End of quote. In 1645, another book was published at Todi by Fra Filippo Dragoni of Luconiano de Valde Chicana. This list of sources are not meant to be exhaustive. Its purpose is simply to indicate the earliest evidence for the existence of this rosary. The documents seem to indicate in 1617 as the approximate date of the origin of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows, and they offer evidence of its rapid diffusion within the order. History shows that this rosary was not foreign to the life of the order, but it was a concrete devotional expression of the Marian spirituality of the Friar servants of Mary at the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century. It was not, however, primarily intended to foster the spiritual life of the friars, but rather a spiritual exercise meant to nourish devotion among the laity of the company of the habit. As often happens with the pious devotions, the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows was not first an official devotion of the order. It was simply a personal proposal of a few friars who were sincerely convinced of the spiritual and apostolic value of the devotion to the Sorrowful Mother and the order's obligation to propagate that devotion among the laity. During the first half of the 17th century, the friars' attitude toward the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows can be described as follows. They considered the devotion to the Seven Sorrows as a time-honored tradition approved by the Church, which the order could neither ignore nor substantially modify. But at the same time, they recognized that the Rosary was a new form of expressing this devotion. They therefore did their best to explain it to the people and provide a definitive method for its recitation. It is easy to understand what initially the method for reciting the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows was not the same in all provinces and priories of the order. The pastoral advantage of having a uniform method of the recitation throughout the order was soon recognized. The General Chapter of 1646 was celebrated at Rome from 19th to 23rd of May by Fra Ippolito Bazzoni of Ferrara, was elected Prior General on the first day. That same afternoon, the chapter took up the question of recitation of the Rosary and named two friars from Milan, Angelo Maria Cornelio and Giuseppe Maria Cinardi, to prepare an appropriate method common of the entire order for publicly contemplating the sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. When the decrees of this chapter were later published in printed form, reference was made a precise method of recitation already published at Milan. Unfortunately, copies of the book referred to this decree have not come down to us, and we do not know precisely what method was suggested. It may be presumed that the decree of the General Chapter of 1646 encountered some difficulties of its implementation, since the General Chapter of 1652, also celebrated at Rome from 19th to 22nd of May, confirmed the decree of the previous chapter. An unelected General Chapter should be celebrated in 1658, but was not. Because of this, Pope Alexander VII proceeded to name Fra Castello Poccinelli Vicar General and then Prior General early as 1660. In place of the elective chapter, a general meeting was convoked on 8th of January in 1660 and celebrated at Reggio Emilia in 30th of May in 1660. This meeting also discussed the method for reciting the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows and issued somewhat polemical decree. And probably, considering the method proposed by the General Chapters of 1646 and 1652 to be new, the meeting forcefully advocates the recitation of Our Lady of Sorrows according to the ancient method, which begins the sorrows with the circumcision of Jesus. In reality, the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows was too recent a development to have had an ancient method of recitation. For the same reason, the meeting could hardly invoke church authorities and pretend to reject and annul any other method. So the controversy could have related only to the content of the first sorrow, which the meeting in 1660 wanted to be the sorrowful, the Virgin Mary's suffering at the circumcision of Jesus. Historical research does not seem to support the peremptory decree of the meeting. From the first half of the 14th century, when the number of the seven sorrows was already firmly established, there were two ways of beginning the series of sorrows. First, In those devotions in which the seven sorrows of the Blessed Virgin were strictly tied to the events of Christ's Passion. The first sorrow was the arrest of Jesus in Garden of Olives. And the second one, the second way of the beginning of the seven series of the sorrows, the other devotion in which the sorrows of Mary were extended to include episodes of the Lord's infancy, and the first sorrow was the prophecy of Simeon. In any case, a list of seven sorrows beginning with the circumcision of Jesus is very rarely found. Neither has anyone yet been able to produce a pontifical document which prescribes beginning of the series of sorrows with that suffered of Mary with the circumcision of her son. Whatever its immediate effect, the decree of the meeting in Reggio Emilia did not have any success in the long run. Just 18 years later, in 1678, Lorenzo Giusti of Florence published a work entitled Scola per imparare a meditare e sette dolori di Maria Vergine, which gave detailed instructions for the recitation of the Rosary of the seven sorrows of the Virgin Mary. The first sorrow was the prophecy of Simeon, and certainly, as years passed, the least sorrows proposed since 1612 by Fra Arcangelo Ballottini became standard, and he too appealed to the authority of the Church. So the principal sorrows were seven. The first, when he presented her son Jesus in the temple, and heard the priest Simeon say to her, "This child will be the sword which pierces her soul." The second, when she fled into Egypt because of the persecution of Herod. The third, when she lost her son during a journey and found him in third day sitting in the midst of teachers in Jerusalem. The fourth, when he saw Jesus carrying the cross to Calvary. And fifth, when he saw him nailed to the cross. The sixth, when they received him from the cross into her arms. The seventh, when she accompanied him to the tomb. So this rosary was created by the friars to nurture the devotion of the laity who modeled their lives to the spirituality of the servants of Mary. As often happens, in similar cases, the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows return to the friars themselves and become part of their custom and one of the pious devotions recommended by the constitutions of the friar servants of Mary. Attention will be given here, first of all, to mention the made by the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows in the constitutions of the Germanic Observance of the Servants of Mary. This was the first reference in a constitutional text of the order. We will turn then to the constitution of the entire order, which treat of the Rosary beginning in 1907. So the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows in the constitution of the Germanic Observance. I hope you will not fall asleep because it is historical. So the Germanic Observance of the Friar Servants of Mary, meaning the Servites, who are now in Germany, began with the foundation of the Priory Innsbruck by Anna Catharina Gonzaga, daughter of William, Duke of Mantua, and the second wife of Ferdinand, Archduke of Austria. In 1612, Anna Catharina, and then a widow, received the habit of the Servants of Mary and took the name Anna Juliana in a monastery of nuns she had founded. She immediately set out the founding of a community of friars and requested the presence of some hermits from Montesenario. The spirituality of the friars of the Germanic Observance were characterized by a special devotion to the sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Evidence of this is found in absolute affirmation contained in a manual for novices, which describes the particular scope of the order as meditation on the Passion of Christ and the sorrows which the Blessed Virgin suffered during the Passion of her Son and other events in the life of Christ. Given this spiritual climate, it is easy to understand why the constitution of the Germanic observance of the Servants of Mary make explicit reference to pious exercises in honor of Our Lady of Sorrows, and particularly the sorrows of the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows. So the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows is mentioned in 2 chapters. Chapter 1, the Marian Reverences, states that the friar must wear the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows in their habit belt as a sign that they belong to the divine army under the patronage of the Sorrowful Mother. In chapter 3, it says, in suffrages, several times specifies the number of rosaries of the sorrows the lay brothers are to recite instead of the office of the dead. So that is the in the constitutions of the Germanic observance starting in 1612. In constitutions common in the entire order, the first mention of the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows is found only in 1907, because after the suppression of the Germanic observance, so they end the constitution, and then we have now the new constitution that is applicable, meaning for the entire order, not anymore, not only to the Germanic observances, but also the friars are living in Italy and some various places. So this is now the common constitution, and we found the Seven Sorrows Rosary in 1907. In the text was prepared by the General Chapter in Rome in 1905 and published by the Prior General Giuseppe Lucchesi in 2nd of July 1907. The late appearance of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows in the entire order's constitutional text is explained by the fact that the texts published between the 17th and 19th centuries were eventually revisions of the text of 1580, which obviously did not mention the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows. In the 1905, in chapter 5, a mental prayer, confession, and communion of the 1907 Constitution, one finds the following exhortation addressed to the friars. In this way, the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows found its way into the order's constitution as one of the devotions recommended for fostering the life of the Spirit. A while ago, I mentioned that the Rosary became part of the habit, especially in the Germanic observance. And during this term as a Prior General, Fra Giovanni Vincenzo Lucchesini made the wearing of the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows in the habit belt obligatory. It soon became the characteristic element of the Servite habit. In his report to the General Chapter of 1678 at the end of his term of office, he informed the capitulars of his decision that everyone was obliged to wear this rosary on his belt even when traveling. This practice, imposed by Prior General Lucchesini, entered in the Constitution in 1607. For all the servants of Mary, priests, brothers, cloistered nuns, sisters of congregations aggregated to the order, the rosary hanging from the belt was not only part of the habit but also a sign of their esteem for this devotion, means for its daily recitation. In chapter 2 on the liturgical offices of the Constitution of 1556 published of Bologna during the generalate of Fra Lorenzo Mazzucchi, required the brothers of any who could not read to recite the rosary in place of the divine office. For the first time, the popular devotion, a corona, commonly known as the crown, is found in the constitutions of the order, and previously on the Constitution Antique and the Constitution of 1503. So 155 Our Fathers replaced the divine office. So the Constitution of 1556 were not acceptable to many. As soon as Matsuki left office, the text was revoked. On the 25th of April in 1569, St. Pius V officially declared them no longer binding. The proposal to substitute the Rosary for the Divine Office, however, has been wise and was included in all successive constitutional texts, including that of 1940. So the constitutions of 1643 adopted a similar criterion for the office of the dead, and what was to be recited when the friars died. So a question remains to which corona or the rosary was intended in the constitutions of 1556. Certainly, it was not that of the seven sorrows, which did not yet exist, but obviously, reasons it could not have been found the crown of the five psalms or that of the holy name of Mary. So it would have been absurd to substitute the recitation of psalms of the divine office with devotion, such as the crown of the holy name of Mary, which was itself made up of five psalms. So the period in which this norm was handed down, the second half of the 16th century, the popularity of the devotion and the function that was meant to serve substitution of the divine office all lead one to conclude that the corona or the rosary referred to is the devotion known as the Psalter of the Blessed Virgin Mary, because it substituted the 150 psalms, or the Rosary of the Blessed Virgin Mary, because the Hail Marys form a crown of roses for the Virgin Mary, simply the Rosary. The increasing esteem for the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows gradually led the friars to read the constitutional articles that mention the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows as reference to the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows of Mary. This represents the existential understanding of the text rather than of the historical juridical interpretation. The lay friars who were primarily concerned resolved any philological doubts of their actions. For them, the articles of the constitutions referred to the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows, which they recited with sincere devotion. The entire order, the Servites, intended to substitute the Our Lady of Sorrows for the Dominican Rosary. During the second half of the 19th century, the increasing esteem for the Dominican Rosary expressed by various popes and its resultant importance threatened, in a sense, the propagation of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows. For this reason, Prior General Francesco Testa in 1885 made a request to Pope Leo XIII, and he said, "Most Holy Father, prostrate before you, the Prior General of the Servants of Mary, humbly ask the favor of substituting in the churches of the order the recitation of the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows of Mary for that of the Dominican Rosary, whenever this latter is required in sacred functions, while enjoying all the indulgences granted to the Rosary." If one considers the zeal with which Pope Leo XIII promoted the Rosary and the equality of the two devotions that is implied in the request, particularly with regard to indulgence, a negative response on the Pope's part would not have been surprising. So the response was positive, however. In the audience of the 12th of September in 1885, His Holiness Pope Leo XIII, having heard and agreed to what was so graciously granted the request of the Order of Servants of Mary. If the pontifical privilege was valid for the laity who came to the Servite churches, it was certainly valid too for the friars themselves when they sought to follow the prescriptions of the constitutions. The favor granted by Pope Leo XIII ended the process of interpreting the terms Rosary of the Blessed Virgin Mary and the Rosary in the Constitution. Literally, they referred to the Dominican Rosary as they had on the second half of the 16th century. In practice, the understanding of the term was changed in favor of the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows. That's a long process of until it was finally approved and it has given a indulgence. Okay, so I would like to read to you the indulgence regarding the recitation of the Seven Sorrows. On the 6th of November 1968, Prior General Joseph Loftus requested Pope Paul VI now Saint Paul VI to determine the indulgences of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows in light of the new norm. In the 3rd of December in 1968, the Sacred Penitentiary granted the following indulgences. For religious of the first, second, and third order regular, and for members of the third order secular, says A. A plenary indulgence once each year if the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows of the Virgin Mary is recited in a church or chapel, in community or some society in which one's family, provided that one goes to confession, receives Holy Communion, recites Our Father and Hail Mary, or other prayers for the intention of the Pope. B. Partial indulgence at other times. And for the faithful, for those people, lady, who wants to pray the Rosary, you have the plenary indulgence under the same condition. If the Rosary is recited in churches or public chapel of the Servite Friars or Sisters. B. Partial indulgence of the faithful when recited as above with a contrite heart. I think that's the important indulgences that we had. We can have plenary and partial indulgence among the friars, the sisters, and all the members of the Servite family, and those partial indulgence, and also with the same with the lay faithful who wanted to have this devotion. So what are the nature and the characteristic of this Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows? The Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows is popular devotion. As the faithful repeated the 7 Hail Marys, they reflect on the Mary's pilgrimage of faith and contemplate her cooperation in the redemptive work of Christ her Son, the Man of Sorrows, by means of God reconciled everything in His person, both on earth and in the heavens. In God's plan, Mary's cooperation continued throughout all the Christ life from His humble birth in Bethlehem to His death on Calvary. A death, however, was not conquered by resurrection and was conquered by resurrection and humiliation that became glory in the mystery of the Ascension. So there are different characteristics of these 7 sorrows. The first character, the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows, is a community prayer. As already stated, the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows was modeled on that of Dominican Rosary. At that time, the Servite Rosary developed the first half of the 17th century. The Dominican Rosary was already in use for both private and community prayer. The same was true from the beginning of the Rosary of the Seven Sorrows. The earliest reference for this rosary and the first works describing its recitation seem to favor community recitations. The same can be said today. The Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows is often recited by an individual as a private devotion, but it also recited by groups of people gathered in churches who distribute among themselves the various responsibilities. Its simplest form, there is a leader and the assembly that responds. Another characteristic of this prayer is biblical. Just as the Dominican Rosary is a biblical prayer, so too is the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows. The events of sorrow and the salvation contemplated in it are taken from the Gospel themselves or from the Church's interpretation of a scriptural text. The Our Father and the Hail Mary that are essential to the Rosary are both taken from the Gospels. Meditations of these events would not be strictly limited to the Gospel text itself. Each has been foreshadowed in the Hebrew Scriptures in the Old Testament, points towards the other texts of Christian Scriptures to the New Testament. Thus, for example, the mystery of persecution during infancy recurs frequently in the Bible in his infancy. Like Moses, the future legislator and mediator of the covenant, was persecuted. During the infancy, Israel, the child of God, was persecuted by the Pharaohs. And during his infancy, Jesus, Messiah, the Savior, was persecuted by Herod. And the church too, in its infancy, was persecuted as is seen in the detailed accounts of the Acts of the Apostles and the symbolic prophetic book of Revelation. It is hoped that while meditating the sorrows of the Rosary, each individual can come appreciate the foreshadowing of the Old Testament and the existential reference to the life of the Church. Now we have the Christological, Ecclesial, and Anthropological character of this prayer. So the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows is very evident Christological and Ecclesial content, which helps to understand the salvific significance of Mary's sorrow within the context of the mystery of Christ and the Church. Its anthropological content leads one to see the value of the suffering of the Lord's Mother in relationship to the existential reality of humankind, with its pain and anxiety, its hopes, and its destiny. The Christological content of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows is obvious, since in the Virgin Mary everything is relative to Christ and dependent upon Him. The sorrows too all refer to the mystery of the Passion of Mary's Son. The suffering Christ defined the Marian sorrows and give them their significance and salvific value in the life of the Church and the individual Christians. The Paschal Dimension of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows must always be kept in mind during its recitation. The Rosary constantly on the Passion of Christ, seen as an event both bitter and glorious. The experience of death and life, defeat and victory, darkness and light, hatred and love. The Passion of Christ is the hour of the apparent victory of Christ's enemies and the triumph of darkness. So the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows is directed toward the contemplation of the Paschal mysteries. But because of its unique approach to the event of the Lord's resurrection, it does not explicitly provide for meditation on this mystery. This can be explained by two truths. First, the age-old phenomenon of cultic historicizing tend to distinguish, celebrate, separate, and various episodes in the single Paschal mystery while giving detailed attention every aspect of Christ's humanity. The second, the cultural climate of an era in which the Rosary of Our Lady Sorrows developed was dominated by devotion to the Passion of Christ. Ecclesial. The sorrows of Mary, as they describe in the Gospel, are not private experiences. They are part of the history of salvation. From the very early times, theological reflection has pointed out the relationship between Mary of Nazareth and the Church. The devout recitation of the Rosary of Our Lady of Sorrows, one easily knows the ecclesial significance of the Virgin Mary's suffering and sees their continuation in the life of the Church. Anthropological content. The Rosary centers on loving contemplation on the sufferings of Christ and His Blessed Mother. Jesus Christ, the new and the perfect man, became like His brothers and sisters in every way and was tempted in every way that we are yet never sinned. The condition of humanity on earth is one sorrow and pain. We believe, however, that Christ is accepting evil of both physical and moral sufferings, conquered and redeemed it. According to Saint Pope Paul II, John Paul II, he wrote, as we quote, "With the Passion of Christ, all human suffering has found itself in a new situation. In the course of Christ, not only in the redemption accomplished, both sufferings, but also human suffering itself has been redeemed." And now another character of this prayer is numerical prayer. The recitation and the rhythm of this prayer is not left to the individual, but rather they are determined by the very structure of the devotion. This is due to the practical necessity as well as the historical and the symbolic reasons. The number 7 characterizes this rosary. The 7 sorrows and contemplated for each. The 7 Hail Marys are recited. So 7 mysteries, and we have the 7 Hail Marys of each mystery. I think that's the important thing that we must be reminded of, about the importance of these 7 sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Maybe in our next video, we will talk about and we will contemplate and discuss and reflect on the 8 mysteries of the 7 sorrows. So as of now, that is the long discussion, and as I talk with you regarding the history and the value of the 7 sorrows of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So until next time, see you.
Oh, how sad and sore distressed was that mother highly blessed of the soul.